now open it and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. More being found out about our Supreme Court nominee. In fact, the charm offensive is on. I don't know if you've been paying attention. Was out, feeding the homeless today. Little mac and cheese. Would you like some mac and cheese? Little slap of mac and cheese there for you. Got that going on. I found out good dad in the carpool lane. Basketball coach. Truth be told, could be your neighbor. Could have been me. Who knows? Difference. I saw this article over at Washington Post, and it's one of those things that we don't really focus a lot on when you talk about judges. But they actually looked into what they could find of his financial past. And look, when you throw yourself out in the middle of any of this stuff, they're going to scrutinize everything you do regardless. And you know that going in, which is why, my wife has told me I'm not supposed to run for anything, because they scrutinize everything you have, everything you do, every bit of your life is open for scrutiny. And the Washington Post did a piece on his financial situation. Here's a guy who for years has been making 200 plus. His wife's making good money. They got $1 million home, of which I guess they bought back in, I think it was like 2006. Paid $1.2 million, I guess. Still have somewhere in the $865,000 debt range in the house. What I found interesting was it appears from their reporting that Brett Kavanaugh has a credit card problem. Maybe the wife spends a little bit, or maybe it's his baseball tickets. Evidently, over the past decade, he's spent a whole bunch of money on baseball tickets. I guess, going to the Nationals games can be quite expensive. According to White House spokesman Raj Shah, he told the Washington Post that Kavanaugh built up the debt by buying Washington National season tickets and tickets for playoff games for himself and a handful of friends. Shaw said some of the debts were also for home improvements. They point out that Kavanaugh's most recent financial disclosures form reveal assets between $15,000 and $65,000. Now, look, here's a guy who's been making about $250,000, close to $250,000, about $225,000 a year, plus his other stuff. Does some teachings, at different places. Another 27, 28 grand. So puts him right about $250,000 a year. If you've got less than, just saying, typical, he is an American. He's an American. And credit card debt, not much savings. I'm going, what part of this guy wouldn't side with the consumer over the credit card companies? But not him, man, not him. They point out in 2016, Kavanaugh reported having between $60,000 and $200,000 in debt accrued over 3 credit cards and a personal loan. Each credit card held between $15,000 and $50,000 in debt, and the thrift loan was somewhere between $15,000 and $50,000. And again, like I said, current mortgage of about $865,000. They go on to say that the credit card debts and loan were either paid off or fell off the reporting requirements in 2017, according to the most recent filings, which do not require details on the nature or source of payments. Now, Raj Shah, White House spokesperson, told the Post that Kavanaugh's friends reimbursed him for their share of the baseball tickets and that the judge has since stopped purchasing season tickets. Maybe it's just me, but that sounds an awful lot like somebody who's got a gambling problem. Sounds awful lot like somebody who ran up a bunch of debt, betting on baseball with his buddies, and the wife told him can't go anymore. Now, 2017, interesting that in 2017 his friends started paying him back. I'm not making any accusations. I'm just saying the timing seems curious, because it then brings to me how long has this been in the works? How long has this Kennedy stepping down, if you replace it with my boy Brett, how long has that been going on? Because understand, I was kind of taken, and I think a lot of people were taken by surprise that Kennedy stepped down, because he had hired a full slate of clerks for the next judicial session, for the next court session. You generally don't do that. You don't bring people in with the hopes of, I'm going to clerk for a U.S. Supreme Court, only to go, sorry, better luck next time. It's one of those weird things. And, I look at this and you start going, on $250,000 a year, plus his wife makes another 60 something, 66, I guess it is. You start going, there's a lot of income there. Where does it go? I'm wondering if that's going to be something that pops up. Now, what's interesting also is that you've got Rod Rosenstein, who evidently has asked all of the attorneys generals across the country to send him 3 people to comb through Rosenstein's documents. A number of people are saying this is highly unusual. I've been looking and I've been trying to find. Evidently, this is how things used to be done. The Justice Department did help out in vetting. It would only seem sane and logical. I don't know. I seriously doubt the Democrats have any juice to force Rosenstein into digging into this guy's background. I got to think this is coming from the little troll, to kind of quicken this along, because they've really got a deadline to get this guy through. Because if this takes 2 or 3 months and something down the road stalls the process, however you want to say it, maybe there is a gambling problem. Who knows? Maybe there's, with the justice that he worked with and there was some shenanigans, hanky-panky going on. Maybe he's in the middle of that. Who knows what they find when they dig out the shovels and they start digging up your backyard? Who knows? But they know they've got a very short window to ram this guy through. And if they do find any trouble, they've got an even shorter window to bring somebody else in to be able to fill it before November. And this is a race on the clock. This is a race to getting them, whoever it is, put into place by November. Now, they still have until January to do it, but you got to wonder, would the American people tolerate that, given the fact that McConnell's the guy who actually, stole the last seat? And given the fact that, Mueller may, by the end of the year, come out with his results. And do we want a justice who has said that he doesn't believe the president should be under investigation on the bench at a time when we've got a president under investigation? Just kind of lots of questions, lots of things that make me go, is this the right time? Is this the right guy? But like I said, here he is, average guy, just like you, average American. And I got to wonder if they didn't throw that out to to make him seem even more sympathetic. You know, he's just a hardworking judge, you know, makes $250,000 a year, lives in a $1 million house, you know, but he's still struggling too. He still knows what it's like to miss a paycheck and not be able to pay the light bill and be worried about, you know, the kids, you know, tuition, $10,000 to the private school for each. He still knows. And I just a little, I got some questions, as I think we should all have, to have this guy sitting on the bench. So for me, the friends coming and paying off his debts, I think that's a fair question, along with his judicial philosophy and whether he thinks corporations are people, or, you know, all down the list of, you know, the 1,000 questions that I have. Now, interestingly enough, Megyn Kelly chimed in today. She says, to me, I find it so irritating. It's irritating to her. I have covered wall-to-wall the confirmation hearings in D.C. of Chief Justice John Roberts, of Samuel Alito, of Elaine Kagan, of Sotomayor, and I look at this going back in history. Scalia was confirmed by a 98-0 vote. 2 people were missing that day. She said Scalia was obviously hard right. Kagan, Sotomayor confirmed with high 60s votes. Democrats lost the fight on November 6th. The only question now is whether Brett Kavanaugh is qualified to take this office, or is he so radical that no reasonable person would put him on the Supreme Court? I would argue that. I would argue that, you know, the whole 20th century is under attack, and that this guy is going to be, you know, one of those, the person. He's the fifth vote. You know, he's the Pete Best. He's the fifth Beatle, if you will. She goes on to say Trump deserves his choice, just like Obama deserved his. Megyn, little reminder, just kind of throwing it out, and I know it's kind of like beating a dead horse, and I know that, you know, it's a little inconvenient. But Megyn, Obama had a choice. His name was what was it? Let's see. Oh yeah, Merrick Garland, who never got a confirmation hearing, who never got his day in court, so to speak. So you've got Megyn Kelly saying, well, you know, Trump deserves his. Obama got his. No, Obama didn't. No, he didn't. So don't go there. Just don't go there. Now, I'm going to find it very interesting to see how this plays out, because I'm curious to find out what they bring up. Will Democrats use this as an opportunity to really hammer on the fact that this guy is an extreme justice, that things that we take for granted every day, you know, things that our grandparents fought for, you know, basically the whole 20th century, when those start falling by the wayside, be it workers' rights, consumers' rights, civil rights, you know, go down the list, women's rights, go down the list of voting rights, just keep going. All of those things that, you know, we've now taken for granted, when they start dropping off like flies, what do we do? And I think this is an opportunity for Democrats to step forth and say, look, get ready for it. You're about ready to lose a bunch of the things that you take for granted. And this is the guy why. And then to be able to back it up, because I've had a bunch of people sending me, did you see this case? Did you see that? Did you see this case where, you know, he says he wants to abolish collective bargaining rights? Did you see this where he said, you know, cops can give tickets to people who are legally protesting? Did you see that? And yes, I mean, it's worse. And the more we find out, I think the more the silent majority of this country, who probably couldn't name a Supreme Court justice, maybe we'll wake up and go, this is, if what I'm hearing is true, this is extreme. And then maybe they'll call their representatives. Maybe the senators will get a phone call. That's my hope. But got lots of questions, lots of things to talk about today. We're going to focus on that. We're going to get our good friend Propane Jane to share some thoughts on, the Donald derangement syndrome. Let's see where that goes. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Elliot Mincberg. He is a senior fellow over at the group People for the American Way. Right back with Elliot. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. The Little Steel Strike was beginning to collapse. Strikers in Massillon, Ohio had gathered that Sunday night at Union headquarters across from Republic Steel's Massillon Works. As Ahmed White describes in his book The Last Great Strike, the Union had organized weekly festivities on Sunday nights, including food, live music, and dancing. For weeks, the Law and Order League had repeatedly demanded special police be deputized and armed to crush the strike. By early July, Ohio National Guardsmen ensured the forcible reopening of the mill. One self-appointed special deputy leader, Major Curley, decided tonight would be the night he was going to, quote, clean out that goddamned hall. He provocatively positioned his deputies in front of Union headquarters. First, he ordered his deputies to fire on picketers attempting to block the gate at shift change. When strikers hurled bottles and rocks in response, the deputies unleashed massive rounds of gunfire and tear gas for more than half an hour. Guardsmen, railroad, and company police joined in the anti-SWAC siege. 2 strikers were dead. Nick Valdos was shot in the hip as he attempted to aid wounded strikers. Fulgencio Calzera was shot in the back of the head in front of Union headquarters. Another 7 strikers were shot and seriously wounded. At least 4 more were hospitalized with injuries. Police forces ransacked the hall, seizing Union records and membership lists. They continued their rampage through the neighborhood, ransacking homes and arresting anyone suspected of having ties to the Union. As many as 165 were arrested and held for several days. As White notes, the NLRB and the La Follette Commission both concluded that blame for the evening's violence lay with Republic. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty that this...
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So lots of questions to get to on this Supreme Court nominee, which is why we've asked Elliot Mincberg to come talk with us. He's a senior fellow over at People for the American Way. Elliot, thanks for taking time for us.
Pleasure to be with you, Rick.
So, I'm looking at this nominee, and my first thought is, kiss the 20th century goodbye.
Well, there's no question that his narrow-minded elitist philosophy would roll back much of the social safety net of the 20th century. He's argued that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was unconstitutional in one dissent because it didn't give enough power to the president to fire the head of the CFP. He's consistently tried to reverse decisions protecting workers by the National Labor Relations Bureau. He's argued that the FCC didn't even have the power to pass the net neutrality rules that they passed, which have since been repealed by the Trump administration. He says they didn't even have the power to do it. On health care, he's twice dissented from decisions of the D.C. Circuit that upheld the constitutionality of the ACA. Roe versus Wade abortion rights, you name the issue, Kavanaugh is somewhere in the 18th, maybe the 17th century on a lot of those issues.
Wow, going back that far. I was giving him the 1880s. We're going even further back than that.
All right, I'll give him the 1880s. That's fair.
Because, I'm looking at this, and, the Washington Post, article out today that here's a guy who doesn't have a lot of assets, ran into some credit card debt. You would think this would be a guy who the credit card companies have stuck it to. He'd go, maybe I want some protections. Evidently not.
To the contrary, he is consistently ruling in favor of corporations and against the little guy, whether it's a worker or a consumer or somebody who cares about the air they breathe and the water they drink. We're putting out a report in the afternoon tomorrow, Thursday, focusing on the dissents that he's written to decisions by other judges in the D.C. Circuit, which is a real mix of both progressive and very conservative judges. He's dissented more often per year of service than any other judge on the D.C. Circuit, often dissenting from conservative Republicans. For example, he dissented from a ruling by two conservative Republicans that it was okay for D.C. to pass a law that banned assault rifles. Kavanaugh claimed that even that was illegal under the Second Amendment.
Yeah, the thought is, and I remember when Trump got elected, I have a fairly conservative friend who said it's going to be interesting watching liberals turn into states' rights advocates. To which I responded, well, it's going to be interesting watching states' rights advocates turn into federalists and wanting, federal power. And this is kind of what we're seeing, a reversal of roles, because I've got a lot of my liberal friends going, well, yeah, they can do that on the federal level, but, we'll fight it at the states. And I'm going, well, not if they consolidate enough power on the federal level. I'm curious, how do you see that working out?
Well, I think it would be a mix. I mean, certainly others of the conservatives on the Supreme Court do have some belief in states' rights. But you're absolutely right. There is, after all, this minor little thing called the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution that generally makes federal laws supreme over any conflicting state law,
right.
And particularly as long as the Republicans continue to control Congress and the presidency, that combination of that and a 5-justice majority on the court sponsored by the Federalist Society, which is what we'll have if Kavanaugh gets confirmed, could very easily make it much more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult, at least in some areas, for states' rights to prevail.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. I used to believe that there were some states' rights conservatives on the court, and then came Janus versus AFSCME, which usurped the states, 22 states' rights, and imposed national right to work on those states who had the right already to choose to be right to work states if they so chose. But our Supreme Court, just decided you don't have a right to do that.
You're absolutely right about that. And for those who say, precedents like Roe versus Wade won't be overturned, in the Janus case, they overturned a case decided 4 years after Roe versus Wade, with no compunction at all, just basically said, we think this one is wrong. And I think everything we've seen from Kavanaugh and the other conservative justices on the court, the Federalist majority, which we may have soon, suggests that they are quite willing to do that, not to mention decisions that protect LGBT equality and many others. Because the key here is that it was one thing to essentially substitute Gorsuch for Scalia, which is what happened last year. But now you're talking about Kavanaugh for Kennedy. And even though Kennedy was quite conservative, he voted, unfortunately, with the majority in that Janus case. There were a number of issues, LGBT rights, reproductive rights, civil rights, and abuse of presidential power, where at least some of the time Kennedy voted with moderates to protect citizens, and without Kennedy and with him being replaced by a hard right justice like Kavanaugh, we're going to see even worse than what we've seen with Gorsuch on the court.
Yeah, no, you've said the Federalist Society a couple of times, and I don't think a lot of people know who this fairly secretive group is, and the kind of power that they wield. And this is another one of those billionaire-backed groups who, they're pushing that original intent mentality. Can you explain who they are a little bit?
Sure. The Federalist Society was founded in the early 1980s. Justice Scalia was very important in getting them going, and it is a right-wing group of law students and lawyers and government officials that has been extremely influential on every Republican president we've had. As I've said, 4 justices already have been approved in large part because the Federalist Society recommended them. And the list of 25 that Trump put together during his campaign was essentially written by the Federalist Society. And talk about your repeal of much of the 20th century, a lot of their propaganda, as you can see from an article on them on our website, it attempts to try to repeal the New Deal, bring us back to the days when corporations and rich people ruled and effectively dismantle the social safety net that the New Deal began the creation of. They have every right to do what they do. They're a private association, but they're extremely dangerous. They are backed by far-right billionaire groups. And Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society basically is one of President Trump's prime couple of consultants on who to pick, not just for the Supreme Court, but for the courts below that,
all of them, right,
where Trump has already set a record pace at getting confirmed people on the Court of Appeals one step below the Supreme Court.
No, the Republicans have really done a masterful job of blocking Democratic presidents from being able to appoint justices. They did it all during the Obama years, did it masterfully during the Clinton years, to where you had Bush, who was able to pack a bunch of judges in, and now you've got Trump, who, packing all those judges in that the Republicans held up during the Obama years. So let me ask you about Kavanaugh, barring any major things, I don't know, like a dead hooker or live boys. Is there any chance of stopping him from sitting on the bench?
There is definitely a chance. It is a narrow path, but it is a path. Basically, as things break down, there are 5 key senators here. And remember that the Senate is basically 50-49 now because of the fact that Senator McCain is, unfortunately for him, effectively out of service,
right,
and the Democrats won the election in Alabama. So it's 50-49. We need a net of 1 Republican vote. So if it's possible to get 1 Republican, say a Senator Collins or Murkowski, who claim that they're very concerned about reproductive choice, and if we can hold Democrats, particularly the 3 who voted for Gorsuch, Senator Donnelly from Indiana, Senator Manchin from West Virginia, Senator Heitkamp from North Dakota, we basically need 4 out of those 5 senators. If we can get 4 out of those 5 senators, we have a path to block Kavanaugh. It's a very narrow path, but it's possible, and it'll depend on your listeners and many others around the country. What we need to do is to generally pressure all of your senators, but pressure those 5 in particular. And if you don't live in one of those 5 states, reach out to people who do and tell them they need to contact their senator and tell them to vote against this guy who, as you put it, would roll back much of the 20th century. That's critical. It's the only way we're going to win. It was the way I was on a call yesterday along with Senator Booker and Senator Warren, who were expressing great leadership with literally thousands of people, former members, and they pointed out we did that when it came to the ACA. We were able to get 1 or 2 Republican senators to stand up against repeal. We need to get 1 or 2 to stand up against this incredible threat to all of our rights and liberties.
No, absolutely. And I hope that, Booker and Warren and the rest of them, I hope the Democrats use this as an opportunity to really wake up the American people to what's going on. Because you look at the Federalist Society, they're all part of that corporate money, that billionaire money that, sprung out of the John Birch Society, out of, the Powell memo in 71 that brought us Heritage and ALEC and all of these, the State Policy Network and all of this moneyed infrastructure that has really hijacked our government. We've almost got a shadow government in this country of conservative moneyed folks who run all of the appointees and run all of the politics. And I don't think that most people, when I bring this up, people are like, oh, that sounds too conspiratorial. No, it's exactly what they've done.
Well, and now under Trump, a lot of those people in the shadows are moving right into the sunlight, like Betsy DeVos and finally recently resigned EPA administrator, who was one of the worst examples. These are folks that Trump is putting in charge of our government. And they are backed, as you say, by lots of dark money from lots of right-wing groups. And they also have the advantage of the fact that ever since the school prayer decisions and Roe versus Wade, the right has realized how critical the Supreme Court and the lower courts are. And I think progressives are beginning to wake up, but we don't have time for further wake-up exercises. we need to be woken up completely now and to get on the phone and do everything we can to organize and to stop this incredible threat to our rights and our liberties and the 20th century.
I'm right there with you. I wanted to ask you about the New York Times story that just came out. They're saying that Rod Rosenstein has reached out to the nation's 93 U.S. attorneys and asked for staff. Evidently, that out of his office, they're going to be pursuing, some vetting. They're going to be going through some of the documents of Justice Kavanaugh or Judge Kavanaugh. Is this unusual to have, the deputy, attorney general, putting together a squad, a vet squad? Is this unusual?
It's unusual to reach out to U.S. attorneys. Usually this kind of work is done by people in the main Justice Department. But Kavanaugh has, people have estimated, maybe more than 1 million pages that need to be gone through and hopefully all given to the Senate Judiciary Committee for there to use. It's conceivable there are things in some of those documents that are relate to privacy or other issues, so it's understandable that someone at Justice needs to look through those, but it's absolutely critical that it get done. It is an incredible burden on the U.S. attorneys who are already amazingly overburdened by what Jeff Sessions has done with this zero tolerance in immigration policy, which has significantly slowed down the ability of U.S. attorneys to do what their regular jobs are supposed to be, rather than insisting, as Sessions has done, on locking up people who have committed very minor misdemeanors. So it is a very unusual move, but if what Rosenstein is doing is limiting what they're doing to just looking at documents, make sure they can be turned over to the Senate, then hopefully what it'll do is to get those documents up there sooner, because one of the things that's critical is that all of Kavanaugh's background be looked at. That includes his time working for Ken Starr, on which there are thousands and thousands of documents, maybe as many as 600,000 pages or more, it's been estimated, from when he worked in the White House, including as staff secretary, where lots of paper comes through. And his role in the Bush White House has not really been fully explored, even when he was nominated to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Senator Leahy believes, even as of today, that Kavanaugh didn't totally fess up on his possible involvement in the torture policies of the Bush White House. So it's critical we get all those documents, that the Senate Judiciary Committee get them, and go through them quickly. It is an unusual move, and it's important to know exactly what those U.S. attorneys are doing, but it's also extremely important that we get those documents before any hearing is scheduled for Mr. Kavanaugh.
Yeah, especially because time is of the essence. The Republicans are going to want to ram this through as quick as possible. And it's the Democrats' responsibility to make sure that he is thoroughly vetted. And one of the questions that I brought up earlier, the Washington Post did a story on his debt problems. I'm looking at this going, this looks like a gambling problem to me. Another question that should probably be brought up.
Well, he claims he was buying Nationals tickets.
Yeah.
And it's well known that he's a Washington Nationals fan. But I don't know, and that's that's certainly a legitimate question for the Judiciary Committee to be asking as part of the vetting process. And I think we don't know, unfortunately. The Judiciary Committee is chaired, of course, by the Republicans, by Senator Charles Grassley. No question he's going to vote for Kavanaugh. But the question is, will he conduct a reasonably fair hearing? In other situations, he's been known very much to favor transparency and thorough vetting. And I think the Democrats are going to push very hard, hopefully privately, if necessary publicly, for him to be as good as his word and make sure we get complete vetting of all of those issues. Another issue that's been raised is, what did Kavanaugh know about the sexual harassment being committed by Judge Kozinski, for whom he clerked and with whom he worked on committees years afterwards? Another important question. A lot of these questions that don't relate directly to his judicial record also have to be looked at carefully and thoroughly by the Judiciary Committee.
I'm right there with you. And as this continues, we'd love to have you come back and keep us up to date on how this is all going and what your thoughts are.
Happy to do it. My folks will be happy to try to get me on whenever they can.
Good stuff. Elliot, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Good to talk with you. Bye-bye.
Elliot Mincberg, Senior Fellow over at the People for the American Way. You want to check out their work. They do some fantastic work. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people.
But I don't really know, and I can't remember caring for an hour.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that the American Indian movement began at a meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of 200 Native Americans gathered together to discuss a response to the U.S. government's history of broken treaties and the devastating consequences on Native peoples. The statistics of unyielding poverty and high unemployment in Native communities were staggering. By 1970, 40% of the Native population lived in poverty. The unemployment rate was 10 times the national average. Life expectancy was only 44 years old. In the early 1970s, activists staged a series of occupations at Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is built on a site in the Black Hills that is sacred to the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. The United States government promised Native rights to the land in a treaty that was broken when gold was discovered. In 1972, activists staged a Trail of Broken Treaties caravan, which ended in a 6-day occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. They issued a statement that read, quote, "We seek a new American majority, a majority that is not content merely to confirm itself by superiority of numbers, but which conscience is committed toward prevailing upon the public will in ceasing wrongs and doing right." Beginning in the 1970s, the United States government began to respond to Native people's demands. A series of federal acts gave Native communities more control over their education and improving their health care. Lawsuits brought by tribes resulted in further economic autonomy. Yet by 2014, 1 in 4 Native people still lived in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you. It's going down. Before you come home, tell me you're not angry.
Important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you. It's going down. Before you come home, tell me you're not angry. And I'll be leaving.
I tell you, I'm loving some of the pictures coming out of NATO, especially the one of Trump looking the other way. Still have no idea what it is he's looking at. Everyone's looking off to the left, and you got Trump looking off. Who knows where? Oh, look, a squirrel. I don't know. There, the point. There it goes. Very, very interesting thing. And then the ripping on Germany, which I kind of get, but is that the place for it? And then to Merkel's face, not so much. Very, very interesting stuff. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on what's going on around in the world in Washington, D.C., Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here. I think the NATO photo really just shows that he is going to be somebody who's not going to be constrained by the globalist deep state. We know from the fact that if you tell Trump not to look at the sun during a solar eclipse, he will look at the sun. If you tell Trump not to congratulate Putin, he will congratulate Putin enthusiastically. So this is just another instance of him showing that he is going to be sort of a global leader and ahead of a curve when it comes to, not following lockstep with certain things like looking the same direction as other world leaders.
Yeah, he's a maverick, right? Is that where we're going?
Absolute maverick. He is draining the swamp here. It is dry as a bone.
Did you see the little chiding that Trump gave to Germany to the UN president?
The NATO Secretary General.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what I
this
mean.
was during a working lunch today at NATO for the annual conference that they hold in Brussels, the annual summit rather. And to make this all the more fun, this was over breakfast. So just some light breakfast conversation in which you attack one of the long-standing U.S. allies. This is over his frustration with Germany signing an oil deal with Russia to build a pipeline under the Baltic Sea that would help transfer Russian oil into German markets. And this is something that Trump said basically just wasn't fair, saying that the allies are paying a large amount of money to essentially defend the Western world from Europe, and then you have Germany making a deal on the sidelines. Obviously Trump is somebody who has been more than willing to signal happy, friendly notions towards Russia, saying that, it's important for relations to grow, but apparently another country getting involved in that is something that he would not stand for. So a pretty awkward interaction, one that got the summit off to a very rocky start, and one that, he ultimately didn't seem to faze him when he had a one-on-one meeting with Merkel, saying that it went great, but something that he decided to take to again when he got on Twitter after it was all over and he had some downtime and essentially laid out his argument again. So there we go.
Did you see Kelly's face? I mean, I was watching Kelly and I was watching Kay Bailey Hutchinson and I was watching Pompeo there, and Pompeo just was like, "Don't make a move. Don't." He just had this look of, "I can't let anybody see what I'm thinking." And Kelly was like, "Oh my God!" And he was just, you could see he was visibly uncomfortable.
The Washington Post actually reported on that, very obvious sign of discomfort coming from John Kelly. And according to the White House, the message that they gave him was that John Kelly wasn't really disturbed by what the president was saying, but was actually frustrated that he didn't have a full breakfast as he was initially led to believe for that meeting. And that sounds like something I'm making up to be funny, but that's actually what the Washington Post reported. Apparently John Kelly was expecting to have, eggs and a full breakfast, but instead just had fruit and cheese. And that facial expression apparently coincided with him being hungry, I guess. So, frankly, I'm not really sure if I believe that, but that is the official White House message that they are sending out.
It's kind of like staying at a hotel where they tell you there's a full breakfast and all you get is a muffin in a bag.
Oh yeah, no, I've threatened people for things worse than that at hotel breakfast.
So you know what? I'm going to give them this one. Because I've been there. I know I've been expecting breakfast, and they bring out some crummy prepackaged muffin. It's always blueberry, and I hate blueberry muffins. So yeah, I completely get it, especially if they brought out cheese, because I don't eat cheese either. So bad blueberry muffin, cheese. You're going hungry till lunch. I get the anger.
Well, also, I'm somebody who lives in D.C., and D.C. has a very strong, very big, almost deeply religious lunch culture, or brunch culture, rather. And I've ordered, certain things that sounded like they were going to be big, hearty meals, like, hash browns Benedict and whatnot, and just got, a piece of toast with some kind of meat puree smeared on that. So, I'm well acquainted with disappointment, and I, have had those similar instances where I just kind of throw my hands up and I'm devastated. So maybe we'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain Pompeo and Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who were just sitting there with this mortified look, almost like like they were statues. A couple of times I had to look at them and go, "Are they alive? Someone take the pulse." Just standing there like statues, going, "I can't show any expression," like they were about to explode.
I mean, this is something that has basically been a running theme of the Trump presidency, the fact that he is impulsive and, he oftentimes just sort of decides new things to be mad about just sort of on the fly. And, considering the fact that the White House has expressed very strongly that the president was, preparing for this summit ahead of time, spent the weekend over in Bedminster apparently going over it, according to White House spokespeople. This shouldn't have come to a surprise of what the president was going to say, but judging from the facial expressions, this was certainly something that, took a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah, and by preparing, you mean they left clues at each one of the 18 holes?
I mean,
just kind of throwing that out there.
No, I mean, that's sort of the message that we get from the White House a lot. I don't think we've really ever gotten any, or not many at least, public affirmations that somebody had actually been golfing with him or that he, actually spent time on the links. I think they kind of expect us to, imagine that he's there and just sort of hanging out in the clubhouse and, studying there, even though, nobody's really buying it. So it's a weird little kabuki dance that we get every week.
Not buying it whatsoever. Let's move along. The sales pitch has begun. Kavanaugh's the greatest guy. He's a great bat. He's like Coach K. He's a good dad in the carpool lane. He helps serve the poor. He's a wonderful person, Justin. Why would anyone possibly be against this guy on the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of that today. And he did go to Capitol Hill for the second time. Taking place today, meeting with members of the Judiciary Committee. He had about 5 racked up by the end of the day. This follows his first jaunt up to the Capitol, where he met with Mitch McConnell, and McConnell expressed a lot of optimism that things are going to be going smoothly. But nevertheless, we have gotten a lot of signs coming from, Senate Democrats that they are going to be pushing back against this very heavily. The new goal right now is to try to secure all of the writing that he had produced under the Bush administration and I guess to a certain extent the Clinton administration when he was working as an aide for Bush, and then prior to that for Kenneth Starr. Something that, probably won't be strong enough to derail the confirmation process beyond the midterm elections, but will, I guess, at least prolong the inevitable and, I guess send the message to the base that Democrats are at least, willing to try to fight this.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, this guy's just everything that's wrong with conservatism and the direction we're going to go as a country. I'm very concerned about the future for my kids. Just is what it is. And I know I've got all these right wingers going, you lost. This is what happens when you lose. Yeah, I get the whole losing thing, but having the whole 20th century repealed, I don't know that I'm all in favor of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that are up there that are just at risk right now. There's, some major concern over what his appointment would mean for, government agencies to issue regulations. That's something that he's fought back against pretty heavily, essentially decrying this sort of, additional extra branch of American, politics beyond the executive and beyond the congressional or legislative that can just kind of set policy unilaterally and without supervision. That's something that's pretty bizarre on the face of it. Of course, there's a lot of concerns over reproductive rights. He previously said that as a district court appeal judge that he would respect the precedent that has been set previously by Roe versus Wade. And, a lot of people have been trying to find a moderate silver lining and pointed to that. But that misses the context that, that wasn't a question directly related to, serving on the Supreme Court. So a lot of concern over that, a lot of concern over the fact that he is going to be filling in for somebody who has been a pretty reliable swing vote when it comes to a lot of social issues. And that has certainly given quite a few Democrats reason to pause.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The other side of this is maybe this is what we need. Maybe a good dose of good old-fashioned rock-bottom conservatism smacked you across the back of the head. Maybe it wakes people up. The old labor saying, when your stomach gets empty, your head gets right. Maybe this is what we need as a country.
I mean, maybe, but, we've seen a lot of promises being put forward by conservatives that are supposed to be populist, and they somehow don't necessarily seem to help people themselves. So I'm not sure if I necessarily share that view on this one.
Well, don't have much of a choice. That's my problem. I'm trying to find the positive in this, and the positive. The only thing I can come up with that's positive is a whole bunch of people are going to be harmed. People are going to lose health insurance. Workers are going to lose rights. Consumers are going to get screwed. Just down the list. And the only positive I can come out of that is everyone's going to be angry. And maybe they're going to be angry at conservatives for doing this. And maybe they pay an electoral price for the next, at least 2 or 3 cycles. Since we have amnesia, I'm not all that hopeful, but that's the only positive I can come up with.
Well, another bright side, of course, is he is a good carpool captain. So maybe he'll start giving rights to the justices. That's 8 fewer cars on the road. And there you go. That's a cause for celebration, I guess.
Because he does believe climate change is real, but that's not going to really help us since He's not willing to do anything about it. Anyway, let's move on. Evidently, Paul Ryan gave Jim Jordan a vote of confidence, huh?
Yeah, he was asked about this today while we are continuing to get mounting allegations from those who were on the wrestling team when Jim Jordan was an assistant coach and have said that Jim Jordan knew about incidents of sexual abuse. And Paul Ryan today basically said that he is standing by Jim Jordan, saying that he is somebody who considers him a friend, pretty much urging people to stand off. And then I guess a bigger deal today is he said that it wouldn't necessarily be correct for the House Ethics Committee to take a look at this, since these allegations took place before he ended up joining the House. That's something that, you know, it hasn't necessarily been the standard for a lot of other lawmakers when we take a look at these things, and probably doesn't stand up now. On his front, Jim Jordan is continuing to maintain his innocence, and also lashed out at CNN today after there, I guess, was some catching of wind in his office that people were calling about 100-plus former staffers and interns for him. You know, something that he said was an act of desperation, but something that a lot of reporters quickly pointed out was basically just bare bones reporting and the exact opposite of fake news, since this was an attempt to collect some additional facts.
Interesting. You know, I've been talking about this a little bit, and he could have gotten out of this very simply of going, you know, at the time, who knew that would happen? You know, we heard rumors in the locker room talk. I'm sure you've heard that. It was locker room talk. Anytime you go see this doctor, drop your drawers. You know, didn't think much of it. You know, it was the head coach's responsibility, something. But to say that they're all liars, I struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange sort of line of defense he's gotten on. You know, this has kind of thrown him off his game to a large extent. You know, he is a very combative individual. You know, he was arguing today that he is somebody who has stood up to Speaker Boehner when Boehner was Speaker, even though they were from the same state. Somebody who has, you know, pushed back time and time again against orthodoxy, and certainly would have, you know, fought back if he was concerned about students being, you know, violated. But I think that line of reasoning probably also betrays the fact of why he has been, you know, pretty evasive on this front and hasn't really been able to answer some of the very obvious questions that this has posed. I think he realizes his reputation and realizes what would happen if he was to, you know, essentially admit a mistake in this era where everybody has to be more Trump and more powerful and more, you know, just I don't want to say hands-on because that sounds a little inappropriate in this thing, but just you know, tougher than everybody else.
Yeah, I get that, but you know, the thing is you're in the era of Trump. You know, you just admit it. I mean, this is what gets me about politicians. You know, he's now married to they're all liars. Instead of, you know, coming out with whatever rationale, whatever reason. You know, I went through it too, you know, something, I didn't think it was a big deal. I don't know, something. But, you know, to take that position, very, very troubling. And now he's stuck to the lie. And now it only gets bigger.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of enrolling in the, you know, usual manner that we see Washington scandals, particularly when there's an initial denial, this sort of slow rollout of more people coming forward, and then just the, you know, cover story becoming more and more implausible. So, you know, it's something I've seen a lot, something I'm sure you've seen a lot, something I'm sure all of your listeners are aware of, and just a sad, difficult situation.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. Striking silver miners in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, blew up the Frisco Mill. The miners were upset because the company had hired Pinkerton guards to infiltrate the mine. Working conditions in the northern Idaho mining district were terrible at that time. Many workers were injured, and some died because of lack of mine safety. When mine owners wanted to purchase new equipment, they cut costs by increasing working hours and decreasing miners' pay. In response, the miners miners decided to strike. The mine owners, unsurprisingly, brought in scabs. Some scabs were persuaded to honor the strike. The mine owners also hired Pinkertons to infiltrate the ranks of the strikers. One Pinkerton, Charlie Sharingo, was so successful at gaining the confidence of the strikers that he became the union's recording secretary. The infiltrator had access to the union's financial records and relayed all information he uncovered to the mine owners. By early July, union miners suspected Sharingo was a spy. The miners became more militant, and in the very early hours, miners gathered to stop a trainload of scabs from entering the mine. Pinkerton guards were brought in to protect the incoming scabs. A shootout between the guards and the miners erupted. It was unclear who shot first, but the miners retaliated by dropping a box of powder down a flume in the Frisco mill. The box exploded, and one company employee was killed. A battle broke out at a nearby mine, and 3 miners were killed before owners surrendered. 3 mines fell into the hands of the workers by that evening. The governor of Idaho declared martial law and sent in the Idaho National Guard to break the union. These events helped to lead to the creation of the Western Federation of Miners.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So make sure you mark the calendars, July 25th. The Manafort trial begins in Virginia. He's up on charges of tax evasion, bank fraud, and failing to report foreign bank accounts. Kind of one of those things that if you're an American, they kind of want to make sure that you're not a foreign agent. Just kind of a thought, especially if you're involved at the highest levels of politics here in the U.S. and the highest levels of lobbying. Just kind of a thing they kind of like to know. Now he's up on all of these charges. Could spend the rest of his life in prison. Today, evidently, the Mueller team asked a federal court in Virginia for 100 blank subpoenas. Now, this is in addition to just about a month ago, them requesting 150 blank subpoenas. And you go, how many people are they going to run through this one case? And to me, it's going to be quite comical and interesting, and hopefully it's going to tell us a lot of what Manafort did with the Trump people. Now, I understand most of this stuff is stuff that, he's been a criminal for years. And the rumors abound have been of criminal activity for a long time, as well as, Trump's past. The reality is if you're in New York real estate, you're greasing some mafia palms. Doesn't matter which ethnicity, there are some palms that are being greased. So going to be fairly interesting to see how this plays itself out. Also, another one of those moments where you go, crazy religious people. Paula White, who is one of Trump's quote-unquote spiritual advisors, was interviewed by the Christian Broadcasting Network and said that there's a difference between immigrants being detained for illegal reasons and Jesus being a refugee. The Gospel of Matthew describes Jesus and his parents, Mary and Joseph, fleeing to Egypt shortly after Jesus' birth to escape King Herod, who sought to kill him. She went on to say, I think so many people have taken biblical scripture out of context on this, to say stuff like, well, Jesus was a refugee. She says, and yes, he did live in Egypt for 3.5 years, but it was not illegal. If he had broken the law, then he would have been sinful, and he would not have been our Messiah. See people are going, well, what happens if Jesus is coming back and we detain him, make him sleep under an aluminum foil blanket and rip the parents away? No, it couldn't possibly happen. Jesus would have never broken the law. I literally have nowhere to go with that other than, are you freaking kidding me? These are the deluded, wow. And people listen to her. and give her money. That's the scary part. There are dimwits who actually give these people money. Scary, scary, scary stuff. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, Propane Jane's going to be here to share some thoughts on the deluded Donald. And, what was he looking at? Was there a squirrel over there? What was that? Quick break, right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Get ready, America. Here we go to war. Generalissimo Trump, who's known to guerre as El Donaldo, the mucho macho presidente of the USA, is personally directing the hostilities in this assault on, surprise, the USA. Well, not every American. He's specifically mounting a war on our country's poor people, though he euphemistically calls it a war of liberation. The purpose, he says, is to, quote, free poor families from food stamps, Medicaid, housing assistance, and America's other programs that alleviate poverty. Welfare, he snarls, as he and his militant lieutenants conduct ruthless slash-and-burn forays to defund and destroy such benefits. Their rationale is that eliminating anti-poverty assistance will not only save billions of tax dollars and reduce the federal budget deficit, but it'll also provide a moral incentive for poor people to get jobs and work their way up to prosperity, like El Donaldo and his billionaire buddies did. Actually, Trump inherited a real estate fortune from his daddy Fred, and he expanded it by relying on billions of dollars in government subsidies, tax breaks, and special favors. As for working, most poor people already have jobs, but the miserly pay of those jobs mire them in poverty and drudgery. Even more significant, the vicious, laissez-faire-land sense of moral superiority possessed by pampered political elites like Trump lead them to be intentionally cruel to the poor. This is Jim Hightower saying he, his cabinet of multimillionaires, and such coke-headed congressional ideologues as GOP House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are so disdainful of the needy that they have a perverse impulse to punish them, as though being poor is not punishment enough. It's said that war is hell, but their war on the poor is truly satanic.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
So I'm still stuck on how bizarre this Paula White's statement is. Look, I get she's Trump's spiritual advisor, and there's not a lot to that, and he's not going to hold her to any real record of actually knowing what she's talking about spiritually. But this whole idea that had Jesus broken the law and been an illegal refugee and illegal immigrant, he wouldn't have been the Messiah, is just really twisted and bizarre to me, because he would never break the law. Wow. Crazy. There are times that I look at people like this and I got to think that religion is a mental disorder. When people take it to this kind of just bizarre extreme. Anyway, to help me maybe work through some of that, I've asked our good friend Propane Jane to come talk with us. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
I look at this, I don't know if you saw this story about this Paula White and how crazy this is. I mean, people who would listen to this woman,
yeah,
and people who would give her money, and there are people who give her tons of money. There's got to be some help for them somewhere. Because I gotta be honest. I think it's a mental disorder.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I think that we, in some ways, kind of misspeak when we say that they are sort of, I guess, using their religion, because ultimately what they're doing is they're using their own personal bigotries. And then the religion itself is like a justification for those bigotries. So a lot of times what you'll see is them just basically morphing Jesus into this like Republican white Jesus figure, sort of like Santa Claus, and how they raised holy hell about, Santa Claus is a white man, because they have, created this image, I think, of both of those figures, actually, of Santa Claus and Jesus, where he actually resembles them, that he is created in their image, actually.
Yeah, I almost got into a fist fight once with an evangelical guy about I guess it'd been about 15 years ago. A guy really, he was going to come after me because I said Jesus probably looked a lot like Yasser Arafat.
Yeah,
which sent him just into a fit of rage. I said, big nose and everything, and because I was trying to goad this guy into some kind of a discussion, and he was having none of it. No, Jesus was blonde hair and blue eyes. I go, he's an Aryan Jesus, and yeah, that was his belief.
Yeah, they totally ignore the hair like lamb's wool part.
Yeah, well.
I mean, if they're not necessarily, strict Bible believers either, because they're not actually taking the word for what it says. But again, I think that they want this exalted figure to resemble themselves, and so you'll see them make all sorts of justifications for, back when the idea of interracial marriage was coming up before the Supreme Court. That was a time when they firmly believed that their religion dictated that people of different ethnicities shouldn't mix. And they will use that book, they will use those words to basically be a justification of their own internal bigotry. Whether or not that's actually, in the word itself, clearly that's not what it's explicitly saying. Otherwise, you wouldn't have people of color. I'm a Black Texan, a Southern Baptist, so you wouldn't have people of color on the other side embracing the same religion, but then also none of the bigotry that they're adding to it.
Isn't it twisted that you can have the same book and everybody seems to agree on the books, and yet you read completely different things in them?
I mean, but that's the thing about it, right? I mean, man is man, and man is always going to interpret words however he, sort of chooses to. And this is how we can have the same story come out in the news, but Fox News sort of flips it into this one viewpoint, while everyone else is saying it a different way. And the people that are receiving that message, if that's a message that resonates with them and confirms and affirms their belief system, then they go with it, whether it's factual or not.
Yeah, but going back to the lamb's wool thing, I grew up in the city. I've actually never, I don't think I've ever touched lamb's wool. Yeah. So it could be just like mine, for all I know. Could be, only different.
Yeah, but I think, in particular, I think in the Black church, I think hair like lamb's wool is something that that Black people in particular very much see as a nod to this was a person of color. This was, like you said, this is somebody that probably looked like Arafat. This is somebody that probably looked like Drake, the rapper Drake. And, he's of Jewish and African American ancestry. So he could have looked all sorts of ways. But I think that the idea that in this country, that there's such a large swath of people that have ultimately decided that this individual had blonde hair and blue eyes, and, looks like this, what the Republican Party holds up as their standard for religiosity, that's where we are. There are people who are actually doing that.
Yeah, but what do you have to say to the person who goes, who makes this idiotic argument that, Jesus wouldn't have come here illegally?
Jesus hung out with the prostitutes and the winos. Exactly. That's who he spent most of his time with, actually. And so I think this idea, again, of law that law is man-made, and it's not necessarily something that you can actually put forth without, imbuing your own worldview and your own personal prejudice and bigotry onto that law. And so what law are they even speaking to? The idea of borders and what is illegal and what's not in terms of seeking asylum, when did that become illegal?
Let's see, that would have been November of 2016.
Yeah, I mean, fleeing for your own safety, when did that become illegal, honestly? But again, they have twisted it so to the point where they think they can just call it a law, and then anyone who has, quote-unquote, broken that law is morally, unjust in their eyes and deserves whatever dehumanization and criminalization and brutalization that these people are getting.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable at what they can justify and what we've justified throughout history in the name of religion and my God's bigger than your God.
Yeah. And I think that, I always think back to, if you just, like in slavery times, most of the slaves, when they were sneaking to learn to read, they were reading the Bible. And what they chose to do with the words that they, read in that book was to give them the strength to endure bondage. And, the civil rights movement very much sprung up in the Black church. The idea of liberation, and Moses bringing these, people who were enslaved out of bondage, that, they call it Black liberation theology. But that's a very salient point of, what Barack Obama, kind of unveiled to the world in his amazing eulogy that he did after the Charleston shooting. That the take on that book was very different in the minds of the people who were enslaved and the people who were enslaving them.
So how did it change from that to the prosperity gospel and free flow dollar needing a $60 million jet?
Oh, greed, obviously. That's the root of all evil, right? I think that aspect is evident across the board. And certainly, that's not everybody. There are plenty of examples of churches that don't do that. And certainly the ones that, are making all this money and are flying in on jets and taking collections for jet fuel, because there's actually a pastor in Houston that does that.
Well, you've got the crazy guy down your way, the not crazy, I truly believe is the Antichrist.
Olstein.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All he needed to do for me was just, not let the evacuees from the Hurricane Harvey into the church.
Well, but those people might come in and see. They might see they might see something.
They might break the law, quote unquote.
Yeah, or they might be casing the joint. Because did you see when he got ripped off? And I still think that was an inside job. It was something like $600,000.
Yeah, I think it was an inside job too.
Of money that people dropped into buckets. That wasn't credit cards. That wasn't the tithing that comes automatically from your savings or your 401k.
Yeah.
These charlatan churches, man. These mega churches. They're deep into your pockets.
They're deep into your pockets, and they're also deep into your politics. The more and more I just kind of sit back and digest this Supreme Court situation, and the very real prospect that Roe will be overturned. This is all a war that is in many ways being waged in church on Sunday.
Yep. Well, do you remember was it Alito? When Alito was being confirmed, they had Justice Sunday. Where they had like 1,000 churches linked up, and they were doing these huge events to get him pushed through because this is God's candidate, and all of these really crazy right wing churches were like this militant army that they wanted to be for years. It was at the time I was scared. Liz.
Yeah. I mean, but this is there. And being a Texan, I've had conversations in particular with, I just sort of will never get over how Wendy Davis lost the governorship, but also just how she lost the white vote, and in particular the white woman vote. And for a lot of those white women who identify as evangelicals, the singular issue for them is abortion.
Right.
And they will, dismiss everything else, I mean, their health care, everything else goes out the window in terms of their political agenda and what they see in terms of bread and butter issues in their house, just because of the issue of abortion.
No, I actually know some of those people, and it's really kind of scary. So let me ask you, if Roe goes by the wayside, which I think everybody assumes that it will within the next 2 years, if Kavanaugh is put on the court, does this then free those voters up to maybe look up and go, oh, gee, all of the brainwashing, all of the propaganda is now gone. I'm going to look to something else.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that they will continue to, because the thing is that the issue isn't going to go away simply because the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade.
Right, but we'll be able to at least punish those people by seeing them die in back alleys.
Yeah, and then America's going to have to decide again: is this what we're devolving to? And I think when you just think about health care, I can't even imagine the magnitude of just the medical atrocity. Not even just in terms of like the imaginary person who's seeking an abortion that most people have in their mind, because I think most people think of this person like, oh, this is like some college girl that's just out drinking and doing whatever and making bad choices, and she's the one who's out there trying to get an abortion. I think that's who people are thinking about and who they like want to punish and want to teach her how to learn a lesson,
right.
But when in reality, so many of the women who receive abortions in this country are women who already have children, who are married, maybe, and already have families that are the correct number of children that they set out, to plan for their family. They only wanted to have 2 kids. And so ultimately they don't want to have a 3rd child, or, because of, the circumstances of her, 2 pregnancies, or maybe she has some type of medical condition that makes it really, not a good decision to follow through with a full-term pregnancy. That's a decision that she's making to terminate that pregnancy.
Right.
And so just totally discounting the reality of the situation, that this is a medically necessary procedure for a lot of women. And this community solely thinks about, they're saving a life and they're bringing somebody to life, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't necessarily think about how high the maternity mortality rate is in this country, and in particular in a lot of red states.
Yeah, they don't care. I mean, that
they don't care.
No, I mean, at the end of it, and I've had these conversations with people who tell you about, oh, we just want the baby born, and I go, okay, well, let's raise your taxes so that we can make sure that they get the prenatal care that they need, and the education and the
WIC and the Medicaid
everything.
And the Obamacare, et cetera, that they cut every day, basically.
Right, and what happens is, well, no, we don't want that. Well, who's going to take care of these kids? If these women can't, if these families can't, who then? And then what happens to these kids? And well, that's not our problem.
Well, and what are you doing about the kids that are in cages that have been separated from their families?
Well, they're not really kids. They're just kind of they're not Americans. We don't care about them. They're lower. So
I mean, the hypocrisy is just everywhere you turn. And even more so, just to tie this whole what storm into a bow, with the religion angle, and also just this weird kidnapping of children that they're doing. And you have Betsy DeVos and these religious adoption agencies in Michigan, that are basically taking in these children and then, giving them to people who are white evangelicals that are going to, raise these children, presumably as white children, as passing for white children. So there's an element even of like ethnic cleansing that's happening to some extent. And I think that it's fueled by like hypocritical people, number one, but it's also fueled by people who have this religious bent, and it just doesn't. It's not even internally consistent.
No, I'm with you. I mean, it's not, and it's one of those things that, it's remarkable to me that people even listen to these folks and are duped by it. But here's the thing: this is nowhere near the conversation I wanted to have. It's just where we went. I wanted to talk about how crazy Trump was today in his little thing, and I wanted to get your thought on the outburst at the breakfast table, and then the really bizarre kind of, oh, hey, things are great. We got a great relationship later on with Merkel sitting next to him. Did I miss something?
I mean, honestly, my reaction at this point is, all I can say is instability in chief. All I can do is refer people to Instability in Chief, Daily Kos, circa December 2016. And this man, he is mentally, emotionally, cognitively unstable. And so nothing he does surprises me. Everything he does that appears unstable seems consistent with the fact that he's been nothing but unstable the entire time he's been in the public eye, and definitely the entire time he's been the fake president of the United States. So the fact that he's still, I was amazed that he was even allowed to be, sworn in. No, seriously, every day that the 25th Amendment has not been seriously considered is appalling to me. I mean, as a clinician, this is someone who, if he showed up in my emergency room, I would be asked to do something with this man.
Right, but here's the thing. Here's the reality. He's doing everything the moneyed interests want. He's packing the courts with crazy people. He's giving massive amounts of tax cuts to the very wealthy, running up our national debt, creating the crisis down the road that'll eventually be the end of Social Security and Medicare. He's doing everything the extreme conservatives want. So until he starts turning that corner, and until he starts turning against them, he's aces.
Right, and the reason why is because of everything else we discussed prior to you just saying that. Because ultimately, they do not care how much of a just lunatic this man is, because ultimately their stated goal in terms of instituting their theocracy, basically, their Sharia law in America, the American Taliban, that is being brought to fruition. They're bringing back Jim Crow. They're reversing affirmative action. They're doing everything that these people religiously believe to be the right thing to do. And they feel like they have the word of God literally supporting them in this. And so it does not matter if Trump goes up there and says whatever, does whatever, looks like whatever. They are going to continue to back this man because ultimately he is the means to an end.
No,
and they don't care. They don't care about anything else.
No, you heard that from evangelicals in 2016, and you hear it every time we find out about Grab Her by the You Know What or Stormy Daniels or any of the stuff, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, any of that stuff. It's all of, God sent him to us to put this guy on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, they believe this. They believe, and again, Paula White, this is how they justify that, right? I mean, in their mind, he hasn't broken any laws, even though he's broken like so many laws. But by their rule book, that's a completely different rule book for them versus everyone else. He's pure as the driven snow.
Scary, scary, scary stuff. So I want to get your thought on the photo. It seems like every time they get together, there's a bizarre photo. Is this Germany's doing? I mean, the Merkel photo is kind of funny. This one today of him everybody else looking one way and him going, oh, what's that over there? Squirrel? I don't know. Butterflies? I don't know. Thoughts?
He's a sociopath. You know what? You just give me these layups, Rick. He's a sociopath. I mean, this is what he's supposed to be doing. He is supposed to be going the complete opposite direction of where everyone else is going, is because his entire existence is meant to be contrary. It is meant to be obstinate. It's meant to be defiant. Shout out to Carol. She mentioned that to me during the break. But it's absolutely true. There's a disorder for adolescents and children called obstinate defiant disorder. And basically the root of that disorder is being, obstinate, refusing to go the way that, everyone is going. But when everyone is going, the socially accepted way, actually, not following rules, not respecting authority. And so Trump, though he's a 2-year-old man at this point, he still has that mind of that obstinate, defiant, child, actually. And so he is going to do that on purpose, simply because he's so narcissistically driven that he has to set his own path. He has to do something different.
No, it's going to be an interesting couple of days. And look, the base, as I woke up today, the first thing I saw was CNN reporting, Trump comes out swinging, and I'm going, why do you write that? This is just feeding the troll class. Don't do that. And then you saw John Kelly. Did you see the little bit of Trump, doing his little do and John Kelly writhing in pain, evidently because there was no breakfast?
Why won't he just resign?
I don't know why. That's one of those questions that I've got. Maybe he's got. I'm not even going there. Maybe.
Yeah, like, is he being blackmailed? I mean, what's going on here? Because he just looks so miserable.
He does.
I mean, I don't feel sorry for him because he totally signed up for this. But I mean, he just looks like, oh my gosh, just somebody get me out of here. I'd rather be anywhere but here.
So not buying the breakfast argument?
No, I'm not buying that. I mean, he was the one that was face palming. Like, there was the image of, all these images of him are him being exasperated. And who wouldn't be in that position? I mean, it's realistic. I think it's an accurate portrayal of what is actually going on for this man, and then afterwards they sort of have to give these really harebrained excuses for what was going on, but it's all just a sham.
No,
he needs to resign.
I'm with you, but I still liked watching the torture. But this is not good for him. This is, everybody who works there looks terrible. Of course they are, because if you read reports, the reports that you see, he treats everybody terrible, and they all know at one point or another, their number is going to come up to be thrown under the bus. I don't know why anybody works there.
I mean, it's the most miserable existence. And again, like I said, you really can't even take pity on them or feel sorry for them, because, like I always say, deplorable is a choice. And it ages you and it thickens you on the inside. You can't, to keep up this level of lying and covering up and, chasing after him and trying to calm him down and just everything that they're really having to do, for this 72-year-old man baby. It's very sad. That's all I can say. It's sad.
I can't wait for pictures of the blimp when they get to the UK. That's all I got to say. Jane, I appreciate the time. It's always great having you on. Always a blast.
You too. Have a great week.
You too, our good friend Propane Jane. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Just about through. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. The Little Steel Strike was beginning to collapse. Strikers in Massillon, Ohio had gathered that Sunday night at Union headquarters across from Republic Steel's Massillon Works. As Ahmed White describes in his book The Last Great Strike, the Union had organized weekly festivities on Sunday nights, including food, live music, and dancing. For weeks, the Law and Order League had repeatedly demanded special police be deputized and armed to crush the strike. By early July, Ohio National Guardsmen ensured the forcible reopening of the mill. One self-appointed special deputy leader, Major Curley, decided tonight would be the night he was going to, quote, clean out that goddamned hall. He provocatively positioned his deputies in front of Union headquarters. First, he ordered his deputies to fire on picketers attempting to block the gate at shift change. When strikers hurled bottles and rocks in response, the deputies unleashed massive rounds of gunfire and tear gas for more than half an hour. Guardsmen, railroad, and company police joined in the anti-SWAC siege. 2 strikers were dead. Nick Valdos was shot in the hip as he attempted to aid wounded strikers. Fulgencio Calzera was shot in the back of the head in front of Union headquarters. Another 7 strikers were shot and seriously wounded. At least 4 more were hospitalized with injuries. Police forces ransacked the hall, seizing Union records and membership lists. They continued their rampage through the neighborhood, ransacking homes and arresting anyone suspected of having ties to the Union. As many as 165 were arrested and held for several days. As White notes, the NLRB and the La Follette Commission both concluded that blame for the evening's violence lay with Republic. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So if you're one of those people who likes the idea of a free and open internet, Brett Kavanaugh is probably not your guy. Again, another guy who, one of these far-out conservatives are saying, you know what, the FCC doesn't even have the authority to even come close to regulating it. It's not their job. It's private industry. And look, you know, this is corporate rule. And for me, one of the first questions that has to be asked of this guy, do you believe corporations are people? Are you going to buy the Mitt Romney rule? I'm here to share some thoughts on maybe what happens if... Jeez, I almost can't say it. Brett Kavanaugh gets put on the Supreme Court. What's it going to mean for folks here in Pennsylvania? I've asked our good friend John Neurohr to come talk with us. He's communications director with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. Great to talk to you again. It's been too long.
It has been too long, and I appreciate you taking some time. But now's a perfect time. This could end the 20th century.
Well, you know, the net neutrality angle is really important. It's one that not a lot of people are hitting on. Not enough people are hitting on. But the reason for that is there are so many issues for us to be talking about when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh. And one thing that folks don't realize, we're really talking about millions of pages of documents in his paper trail because he's been a judge on the D.C. Circuit for so long, and he's written so many opinions. So, you know, actually, I think in some regards that is helpful to Democratic senators who want to make sure that they can slow this process down a little bit, because certainly Mitch McConnell and the Republicans want to get this moving as quickly as possible. So having all those documents, all those opinions to go through on all of these issues, though they are terrible opinions, is actually helpful in some regard for Democrats and their strategy right now.
And I would also argue, and you know, part of me thinks that this is also an education opportunity for average voters who may not know exactly what the likes of Alito and Roberts and Gorsuch and now and Thomas and now Kavanaugh, where they come from, what their positions are, and how it's going to affect people's everyday lives. When I say
we could see the end of the 20th century. People go, oh, you're just being hyperbolic. I'm not. I truly believe all of the things that we hold dear, from workers' rights to civil rights to women's rights to go down the list, to health care, to net neutrality. I think all of that's on the table to be eviscerated and done away with.
Well, that's the game plan. I mean, this is the culmination of a decades-long plan that, frankly, let's be honest, conservatives are better, have been better at this than progressives, and that is to build up the bench of jurists, and that starts at the district courts and all the way up through when it comes to the federal courts. We've talked about this before. We have a project at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center called Why Courts Matter Pennsylvania. We've been doing a ton of work on the federal courts. Right now it's hot because it's a Supreme Court vacancy, so everybody's paying attention. But the truth of the matter is, when we talk about the federal courts, we're talking about hundreds of judges at the district court and the circuit court levels. They're hearing the vast majority of these cases. I mean, few cases actually end up before the Supreme Court, and most of the time they stop at the district court or federal court level. But you're right, no matter what issue we care about, you named a whole bunch of them, there are lots more. Those issues are eventually adjudicated in the courts. And right now we live in a country where, in a lot of respects, the courts are the last bastion of hope for a lot of the things we really care about. When you have an administration run amok, the courts are that only check and balance on the administration and frankly on Congress. So yeah, this is part of the game plan. There's a reason why Brett Kavanaugh was on that Heritage Foundation Federalist Society list of 25 people. The president did not have to ask questions of these finalists for a reason. We already know all the answers. That's why they're on this list.
Yep.
He doesn't have to ask about Roe v. Wade. He doesn't have to ask about workers' rights. He doesn't have to ask about the environment or net neutrality. We know the answers to all of those questions. That's why they're on that list.
So let me ask you this, because there are some reports out there that Kennedy, I guess, stepped down, and part of the agreement was if he were to step down, Kavanaugh would be the guy. Are we hearing anything on that?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, and it goes beyond that also. And I mean, this, I think, will all come out in the wash, but unfortunately it'll probably be too late. There are also the connections that Justice Kennedy's son at Deutsche Bank has with the Trumps. At a time when nobody would loan the Trump family money, Deutsche Bank was loaning them hundreds of millions of dollars, and Deutsche Bank was in trouble for basically laundering Russian oligarch money. And this is all happening at the same time. Now, look, I do not like to wear a tinfoil hat, so I'm not quite sure what that's all about. There's no question that Justice Kennedy respected Brett Kavanaugh. He was a clerk for him. And there's also no question that the Trump administration, their counsel's office, and those in Trump's orbit were basically pushing Kennedy for the last 12 months or so to retire as soon as possible so that Donald Trump would be able to appoint his successor. And the reason for that is there really is only one thing that Donald Trump can honestly point to that he's been successful in doing, and that it becomes, I think, helpful in an electoral sense, and that is packing the courts. It goes beyond Gorsuch. Like I said, it's the lower courts, it's the district courts and the federal courts that at a record pace, Donald Trump's administration has been filling vacancies, and those are lifetime appointments. So, and they're filling them with young, ultra-conservative white men who are going to be there for a very long time. So that's a scary proposition. So it goes beyond just the Supreme Court. It's the lower courts too, and they're going to all these appointees are going to be there for a very long time.
Yeah, and experience, be damned. I mean, there was the one guy who, I guess his experience was he was a blogger or something.
Yeah.
But eventually he got pushed to the side. But still, even the fact that they would have put this guy up, who had, I guess, never even stepped foot in a courtroom or tried a case, he was going to be on a federal bench somewhere, was quite comical.
Well, and that's exactly right. And then there are the judges when, they line them up and they do the hearings in the Judiciary Committee where they have 5 or 6 of them sitting in there at one time, which in a lot of respects means that you can't really take the time and effort that, the senators can't spend as much time as they should be on each one of these nominees because they're rolling them through the nomination process and they're getting them a vote as quickly as possible. And yeah, a lot of them, not only are they not qualified experience-wise, but they're unwilling to answer, fundamental questions, about legal precedent, cases that are legal precedent. Brown v. Board of Education. That's been a thing over the last few months where they have these nominees for the federal courts who are unwilling to say whether Brown v. Board was correctly adjudicated, which is just, come on, it's just ridiculous. So yeah, this is a very, very scary thing. The Republican Senate did a great job on their part beyond just Merrick Garland not getting a hearing in 2016, but slow walking Obama's nominees from 2014 on, basically. Right. And he was barely able to appoint any circuit court judges, which is right below the Supreme Court, and not many district court judges because they slow walked them, and now they're doing the complete opposite.
No, and look, they did the same thing to Clinton before Bush took office as well. I mean, they have known this and they have been working this angle for decades. And you got to give them credit for having the vision of saying that the judiciary is where the real power is. You can make all the laws you want. They're just going to rule it unconstitutional. You want to have minimum wage laws? We can have the court just do away with it.
The irony here is that the mantra from the right has always been, well, we don't want these progressive or liberal activist judges, right? But in reality, what they're doing by emphasizing the courts and packing the federal bench is what they can't do via legislation because it's not popular in the literal democratic sense. It's not popular. It's difficult for them to pass this legislation or keep people in office who are going to pass legislation like this. They do it through the courts.
Yeah, you see that coming, and that's the thing that's really very frustrating, is you really do see it coming. So what is one of the main things that you're concerned about?
Well, so back to Kavanaugh for a second here. Not only do we know the answers to those questions on issue after issue, but one thing that's really concerning is the other reason why Donald Trump picked Brett Kavanaugh out of the other choices on his finalist list is that, Kavanaugh in a lot of ways is a get out of jail free card. At least Trump thinks so, because the other, like we said before, the other judges that are on that finalist list, they are all in basically sort of the same place on the political spectrum. Ideologically, they're going to come down in basically the same place as Kavanaugh on these issues that we mentioned. But Brett Kavanaugh actually has a fairly significant history of writing about executive power, writing about things like he doesn't believe that a sitting president should be able to be indicted, that you shouldn't be able, either through civil cases or through criminal cases where there would be an indictment. A president shouldn't have to go through that. A president is too busy for that while they're in office. So, the mechanism there is impeachment, but not a criminal indictment. That's music to Donald Trump's ears right now. So, and the thing that is really concerning is there is a much better chance than not that questions about the Mueller investigation are going to come before the Supreme Court in the next year or so. I think that's a fair bet to make. So whether that's a question about whether President Trump has to sit for an interview with Mueller's team, whether he, if subpoenaed, has to appear before the grand jury, and then questions about, whether that sitting president can be indicted. The very thing that Brett Kavanaugh wrote about years ago in a law review, that I think in the end, when it comes down to it, the president looked out for himself, which is, not surprising. That is how he has done business on a number of fronts. But he knew he had this list of judges that were going to fall the right way for his base on issue after issue. or at least that's what he thinks, that's what he believes, and that's what he's being told by the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. So why not look out for himself while he did that at the same time?
No, good point. And the thing is you know, and I've said this before, that you know, you look at the list of judges, and as you pointed out, you know, the Federalist Society does a really great job of this. You know, I said the other day that I think, you know, Kavanaugh was on the list, you know, prior to conception, because mom was on the court, and there's this whole push toward, you know, he went to the Rights Prep School, went to Yale Law, got in with, you know, with this judge and that judge, worked in Starr's office, went to the White House. They were grooming him from, you know, from, I would argue, conception forward to be in this position here, and they have pumped him full of, you know, their ideology, their viewpoints, and moved him in this direction. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And there are groups on the left. You have groups like the American Constitution Society, you know, who they are attempting to put together the same kind, you know, to build up the bench on the left. And that's a good thing, but we are so far behind. And so when you couple that with the fact that, you know, folks on the right, just voters who are of conservative political persuasion seem to understand this better, or they've had this sort of pounded into their heads about the importance of not just the Supreme Court, but the federal courts in general, and judges on the bench. So you had a lot of people that came out in 2016 and voted for Donald Trump, not because they liked Donald Trump. In fact, a lot of them could not stand Donald Trump, but they did it because they knew what was at stake when it came to the Supreme Court and the federal courts more generally. And we just don't have voters on the left that think that way, or at least not enough of them. And we need to change that.
Right.
Because elections have consequences, and
Exactly.
we all know that.
And we're seeing it. But I would argue the left has built almost no infrastructure whatsoever. And this is, you know, and I know I talk about this occasionally, you know, the Powell memo was kind of, you know, the roadmap to get to where they are. Spent tons of corporate money, tons of billionaire money on building these institutions, you know, the Heritage Foundation, ALEC, all of these state policy network think tanks, the Federalist Society. You could go down the list and tick off hundreds of these organizations that have been put into place for one reason: to consolidate power into the hands of a very few and to enrich their bank accounts at the end of the day. I think it just is that simple. And now what we're seeing is a return on the investment. You know, the Koch brothers and their ilk, they're going to cash in.
I think so that's absolutely true. And there is infrastructure on the left to some degree, think tanks and the like, and advocacy groups that are doing a great job. But I think there's just that one extra step that we've been missing for a long time. We have to make the leap from the issues that we care about to the judiciary, right? Because I think there's been that connection to winning elections in the legislative branch. There certainly has been that connection for presidential elections and why those matter. And we just need to take that next step and connect all those things we care about, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the environment, whether it's LGBT rights, you know, whatever it is, checks on corporations. That's, you know, obviously important when it comes to Kavanaugh too. We need to make that leap from those issues mattering in the sense of electing a president or electing a legislative branch and the judiciary and judges and filling those vacancies. That's really important.
Yeah. What do you think of the idea of pushing for, you know, getting rid of these lifetime appointments and maybe going to, you know, 18-year terms or 20-year terms or something along the line? Because look, when the founding fathers, you know, dreamt this up, life expectancy was like 35, 38 years old. They didn't expect someone to sit on the court for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I see the pros and cons there. I mean, there is something to the notion that a lifetime appointment frees a judge up to not have to worry about, sort of like here in Pennsylvania, where every 10 years they have to run for retention at least. And there, I think there is a little bit more of a political nature to the state judiciary because of that. But that it's also true that in a state like Pennsylvania and in other states, the judges are elected too, and they run as a Democrat or Republican most of the time. So, I think that there's a lot of merit to that argument because, look, Kavanaugh wasn't even the youngest person on that finalist list. And so a lot of these lower court vacancies that we talk about that are still lifetime appointments, you have the Trump administration, they're throwing up people that aren't even 40 years old yet. I mean, they have people who are in their mid-30s for these positions. And, I could have great-grandkids before, they even think about retiring from these really, really important judicial roles. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of merit to some kind of mandatory retirement age, or a finite term for these federal judgeships, for sure.
But as one person reminded me, there are some that you may like that may end up being thrown out too. So it's a double-edged sword. Last question I've got for you, and everyone keeps asking the same question. Do you see a path forward in blocking this nomination, maybe even turning Kavanaugh into a verb?
So I think that there is look, elections have consequences, and it's a very tough road ahead right now. I still think that there are, you have two Republicans in Collins and Murkowski who, on the issue of choice, are, I think, still up in the air. I think that when you have people like Senator Casey, who came out with an incredibly strong statement before the choice was even made, because again, he knew that no matter who he chose from that list, he knew where they stood.
They're all
what we need to do is we need to be thanking Senator Casey in public. I gave a talk out here in Pittsburgh this week, and there are Dem senators who are still on the fence too, and they need to see constituents of somebody like Senator Casey, who's up for re-election, who did the hard thing, not the easy thing, by coming out and standing on principle. Those senators and their staff need to see us thanking him, his constituents, for being strong, and just sort of helping to keep them in the fold. And then, we need to help our friends in Maine, in Alaska. Let the senators know there that, this is like you said, there is so much at stake right now, and they also need to be bold and stand on principle. So the path is narrow, but the path is there.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. John, as it continues, we'd love to have you back, share some thoughts. Good talking with you.
It's always great to talk to you, Rick.
Thanks so much. Our good friend John Neurohr, Communications Director with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, also does work with Why Courts Matter, PA. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
7, yeah, and I'll go to work at 9. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that the American Indian movement began at a meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of 200 Native Americans gathered together to discuss a response to the U.S. government's history of broken treaties and the devastating consequences on Native peoples. The statistics of unyielding poverty and high unemployment in Native communities were staggering. By 1970, 40% of the Native population lived in poverty. The unemployment rate was 10 times the national average. Life expectancy was only 44 years old. In the early 1970s, activists staged a series of occupations at Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is built on a site in the Black Hills that is sacred to the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. The United States government promised native rights to the land in a treaty that was broken when gold was discovered. In 1972, activists staged a Trail of Broken Treaties caravan, which ended in a 6-day occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. They issued a statement that read, quote, "We seek a new American majority, a majority that is not content merely to confirm itself by superiority of numbers, but which conscience is committed toward prevailing upon the public will in ceasing wrongs and doing right." Beginning in the 1970s, the United States government began to respond to Native people's demands. A series of federal acts gave Native communities more control over their education and improving their health care. Lawsuits brought by tribes resulted in further economic autonomy. Yet by 2014, 1 in 4 Native people still lived in poverty.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Here's an interesting story coming out of Nevada. And look, this is one of those things that eventually will end up in the Supreme Court. Who knows? Evidently, the maker of the drug there's a drug that puts you to sleep for surgeries. And it's one of the most popular ones. It's called midazolam, if I'm saying that right, midazolam. Evidently, the state of Nevada bought a bunch of this drug from this Alvogen company who makes this drug. It's just sedative, and it's used, I think, in most surgeries across the country. Evidently, they bought it with the intent to kill somebody. They were going to have their first execution since 2006. They were all psyched. They were all ready. It was scheduled for tonight. It was going to happen. They had the last breakfast, all that stuff. And the Clark County District Court Judge Elizabeth Gonzalez ruled in favor of the drug maker, who said, "We don't want you using our drug to kill people. It's not the reason that we created this drug." And they also cited the fact that there have been a number of botched executions that I guess this drug has been used in. And, people have been writhing, and there have been a whole bunch of stuff. They don't want to be associated with it. And what I found interesting is that the judge, or the attorney for the company, this Alvogen, his name is Bice. He argued that Nevada officials deliberately, knowingly skirted the drug makers' attention when they bought this drug, and they bought it from this Cardinal Health Systems, who I guess they specialize in distributing pharmaceuticals and medical stuff. They bought it through this third party so that the company wouldn't know about it. And the deputy solicitor there in Nevada, Jordan Smith, he argued that the company's dispute is not with the state. And I love this. It's not with the state, it's with Cardinal Health. And that, Nevada should be able to kill this guy with their drug. But the company argued that the Food and Drug Administration hadn't given their okay with using this drug for execution. And like I said, it was opposite of what the drug was made for. Saving people, helping people, not killing them. And it got me to thinking that, you've got this company saying, we're against killing people. Maybe all of the anti-death penalty people have been going the wrong way, because politicians don't listen worth a damn, especially Republicans. Maybe the way forward was going after these drug companies who make these drugs and putting pressure on them. Maybe that's the way forward. But I just thought it was interesting that the state would go this kind of a backdoor route. Just It's quite remarkable to me. Now, the guy who would have been executed would have been the 52nd person executed in Nevada's history, and I guess they began executions back in 2003. Now, again, this is it'll go on down the road. I mean, it'll eventually, I'm sure, hit the state Supreme Court, and eventually, you know, I'm sure this will, or not the state Supreme Court, but eventually the federal courts, and eventually could make its way all the way to the Supreme Court, answering the question of, you know, can companies say no? I think it's going to be an interesting little bit. And with this fifth crazy guy, I gotta wonder which side he'll come down on. Lots to think about. Anyway, if you haven't called Murkowski or Collins or Donnelly or Manchin or Heidkamp, do so tomorrow. Make sure that you call early, you call often. Say, hey, too extreme, too far out. We want to save the 20th century. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color.